I want to thank you all for coming in. Today is a good episode. Lately we've been talking about psychedelics and all sorts of different therapy. And, today is a day I think we're going to learn quite a bit. So let me tell you about the guest we've got. Jill Sitnick is an award-winning strategic thinker, an educator who healed her childhood trauma-induced PTSD with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. She has over 25 years of educational technology expertise, having worked for Bensalem Township School District, Microsoft, and Amazon. As the founder of the Journey Sage, she is a credible voice who uses her teaching experience to demystify the process of healing PTSD with psychedelics. Her memoir, Rescuing Jill, How MDMA with a Dash of Magic Mushrooms Healed My Childhood Trauma-Induced PTSD, recounts her year-long healing journey, while Rescuing Jill companion workbook, Intentions, Settings, Prompts for Psychedelic-Assisted Psychotherapy is available to assist people working with psychedelics for healing. Let's go ahead and bring on Jill. Hey, how you doing, Jill?
Hi, Donald. Thank you so much for having me. That was a wonderful introduction.
Hey, I appreciate it. I mean, you did all the work. I mean, man, that says a lot about what you've done.
I try to make a big giant career kind of compacted for folks.
Well, the military, us veterans, it only requires an 8th grade reading, so I had to practice that quite a bit.
I'm sorry about that.
A little bit of a quick background and how you came about with all this training.
So you did all the professional stuff. So I think what will probably interest people a little bit more is that I came to this diagnosis of PTSD and the therapy modality of psychedelics for PTSD about 18 months after my partner Carl had passed away. We had been together for over 20 years. And I always knew I had a bad childhood, but what I didn't know is how much that loving relationship had regulated my nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And so 18 months after his passing, I got a work email and I went into a panic attack that would not end. I knew that the universe was against me. I knew that I was going to be the story I used to say was that I was going to lose my job. I was never going to find another job. I was going to go through my savings. I was going to lose my house. I was going to be living in my car with my pets. There was just this constant knowledge that I was going to lose. The universe was out to get me. Bad things were going to happen, and I couldn't get rid of that. And so I went back to my therapist who had worked with me with my grief work, and she started asking me questions. What's your body telling you? And I always do this because I think my shoulders were like up to my ears. And as I started talking about the physical symptoms I was experiencing and this sense of doom, she ultimately diagnosed me with PTSD. I think now people would have said like complex PTSD, but back then we were just talking about PTSD. And she was in a program to become a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist. She said, go check out the research over at MAPS.org, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They're doing amazing work with PTSD. And if you would like to try this healing modality, I will work with you along with another doctor. And so that was the beginning of this whole healing journey.
Well, that is awesome. The one thing that you said there that I can relate to, the one we say in the military, everybody has demons, but they're not always all the same, and it doesn't matter whether the civilian world, the military world, how each person handles things and how it affects them is completely different. And I've physically seen with my own eyes, people that you're like, I know if I take him to combat, things are going to go great. And it don't go the way you think it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something you cannot predict, how people are going to react and how they're going to handle things. And, I can tell you the anxiety, that panic that you're referring to. There's days that I would wake up with that, and not know why, but I would sit there on the side of the bed and just have this sense of doom, this feeling like something is wrong. And I know it had to have came from bad dreams, but I don't remember the dreams. I could, my wife would tell me that I would be screaming in my sleep, yelling at people. And, there was probably 2 years that my wife didn't even sleep in the same bed with me because she was getting hit and elbowed and stuff like that. And, I don't remember them. I don't know what I was saying, So yeah, and
Mm.
I would just wake up with that feeling, and it feels kind of like a weight in your chest, pressure. It's hard to breathe. So yeah,
Yes.
it is miserable.
I felt like there was you're in the military, so forgive my education background, but I felt like there was this, 100-pound backpack. I
Yeah,
was running a race with this 100-pound backpack. I was never going to get to the finish line, and it was exhausting. The 10% consciousness knew that what I was experiencing and feeling was not true.
right.
The 90%, like what you just said, your dreams, the subconscious part of me, I could not convince 90% of me that the world was not going to just end tomorrow for me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know,
Yeah.
and it even got to the point, there would be times that I did remember some of the dreams, and the weird part about them is the way they went in the dreams isn't the way they went in real life. It was like my imagination or things were just taking off, and details of it would change, and
Interesting.
would have different endings and different scenarios, and you know I never knew where it all came from. It took years for it to finally just settle down and kind of go away. I guess go away, or at least bury itself.
Well, our subconscious talks to us through images. Our subconscious doesn't talk to us through, a voice. And so those dreams, I have dreams too of that just one of them spurred one of my healing journeys, and it's our subconscious, because subconsciousness is look at me trying to do the plural there. It was my subconscious definitely using imagery to try to explain to me how I was still holding on to trauma from childhood. So uh, I give that insight from my experience about dreams.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would make sense. I mean, there was a lot of things. 68 months of, a lot of things happen in 68 months. That's for sure. But
I just heard the term marinating in trauma. And I thought you talked about the time that you were in the military. That's a long time for trauma. Child abuse survivors like me, when you're growing up in it. And I just heard that term today, and I thought, how appropriate, because military folks, it's a constant, at least my impression, and I'm the first one to say I was never in the military. My guess is that it's just a constant pressure and a constant alertness, and you're marinating in it the
yeah,
same way with child abuse.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, and that was, if I ever got to that point, and I have never put the energy into doing it, because just for my own mental health, I stay away from politics and all that stuff, just because it I just don't got the strength, but
Mhm.
if I fight for one thing and change one thing for my military, there would be a law put in place on how much you can deploy somebody, because you putting soldiers out there for 68 months, in my case, some people did more than me. I'm not saying that, I'm one of those guys that did a ton, and there's people that did more than I did, you know.
Mhm.
But you think about, I spent 20 years in the military, and 68 months of that was in a combat zone. That's 20% of my career, you know. So 20% of my time was spent watching for
Death.
different types of threats. And I can tell you, that stuff wears in your mind. I went in Bosnia where the threats were different. They weren't so much people, but they were unknown explosions and explosives, because there was
Doesn't
1.5,
matter.
Yeah, but there was like 1.5 million landmines laying around that we didn't know where they were at because they were being put everywhere. So, you're trained when you hear an explosion, you dive on the ground. Well, you have to be completely rewired to where over there, when you hear an explosion, you stop and freeze. You don't want to dive because that means somebody stepped on something or something caused somebody ran over a mine. But then you go to Iraq and Afghanistan where now you're back into where it's explosions and you dive on the ground. And the first time when I got to Iraq and Afghanistan and I heard explosions, my body did that whole freeze. I don't dive on the ground. And it's your body is just not meant to be trained in all these different types of scenarios and then just unwired and rewired and unwired and rewired. So it's
You
not
know,
right.
so first of all, thank you for sharing that. I did not know that. I didn't. I can completely understand the terror of you don't know where the next danger is. I think, and I'm just going to make the parallel when people with abusive parents, one of the things it's almost one of the things I took from your story was the uncertainty.
Yep.
You never know when it's going to happen. You never know what the next step can bring. And one of the challenges from my childhood experience with an unstable set of parents was that I never knew when the disruption was going to come. I never knew what would trigger the beating. It's interesting you talked about having to be trained to freeze. I learned, and I've heard this from other folks who've also had very abusive, physically abusive parents, that I became so codependent in terms of reading the mood and the body language and the tone that I didn't get to be me.
Yeah.
And very often I would just freeze up. I still remember when I was 10, a particular incident, and I froze because I just didn't know what was going to happen next. And it was easier to freeze and be ready. I mean, I couldn't run as
Right.
a kid in the house. So it's interesting the parallels between the uncertainty, the danger, and how we've almost, in my instance, my codependency trained me a certain way. In your instance, having to survive that particular weapon
Yeah.
trained you. It's interesting, the parallels.
Yeah. I mean, a threat is a threat, and
Yeah.
when you don't know where it's coming from, your body goes into the basic, survival mode, and it does what it feels it's got to do to survive. And in your case,
Yeah. Yeah.
that you were trying to read which war you were in. You didn't know, am I in the good one? Am I on the good side, the bad side? You know, and
From minute to minute.
absolutely, and
Wow.
I personally never experienced that, but I seen it.
Yeah.
So I had a half brother. We had same dads, different moms.
Uh-huh.
I was adopted by my grandparents.
Wonderful.
My half brother was born later, and he lived with my dad. And
Okay.
um, I'm going to tell you that night and day. I had a loving home, taken good care of. My brother did not. He was the one that you know probably lived the same life. He didn't know where the next beating was going to come from. He didn't know whose house he was going to be sent to. And sometimes when he wasn't getting the attention, he would just intentionally do something just to, if he was getting beat, at least somebody was paying attention to him. You know.
Unfortunately, yeah, that happens. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's an interesting dynamic to know as an adult.
Yeah. I mean, I seen it, and I didn't realize it as a kid, because I didn't see him a whole lot. But now that I'm older and can analyze as we grow up, and I know where he's at and where I've ended up, and I'm smart enough to know that, you know, reverse those situations. I may not be in the same place I'm at now. So
Right. Right. It's a challenge. It's a challenge.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I had a guest that come on, and it was funny. You said something just a few minutes ago about how the dreams are like watching movies, and he explained that's kind of the way the psychedelic episodes are. Is it 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 plays your life kind of like a movie clip. You're seeing your life as like a movie clip, and it's giving you messages that way on things that you need to work on, and so forth. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, I think that's actually a fabulous question because it's one of my favorite analogies when I'm explaining psychedelics. So, just to clarify my treatment, so that because the same way that there are different kinds of medications for pain,
Mhm.
there are different kinds of psychedelics for different folks with have a different diagnosis. So, my diagnosis of PTSD, the primary psychedelic used was MDMA, which street name is ecstasy or Molly.
Okay.
And what MDMA does for trauma is it calms the body down. And so during the therapeutic journey, which on MDMA can last anywhere from 4 to 8 hours total, it is, depending on how your system is and the dosage and things of that sort. I'm definitely going to like both sides. On average, my journeys were 5 to 7 hours.
Okay.
During that time, first of all, I don't remember a lot of it. Thank goodness it was recorded so that I could go back and transcribe it. What I do remember is bits of imagery, but most of all, finally being able to talk about my fear of my father. And I just remember repeatedly talking about how I knew if he was in the room, his hands would be around my throat. After the psychedelic journey, so the psychedelic journey is really only 20% of the entire therapy model. 40% is preparing, 20% is the journey, and the last 40% is the what's called integration.
Mhm.
For just a quick explanation, like how you have to have physical therapy after you have a medical procedure, think of integration at a basic level like that.
Okay.
That's when I love the movie thing. I always talk about TV. That's when I would actually see memories from my childhood kind of float to the surface. Like you're in the shower, you're taking a walk, and you just have, ideas float to mind.
Mhm.
I would have the memories float to mind, and they would be like they were a movie, or I used to say like on TV, because my body would not get upset. I wouldn't get into any sort of fight or flight mode, having a memory of me as 3 years old with my father throwing me around the room and throwing me out of the house in the storm. Like I could just watch that memory almost with me at my age in that memory. And most importantly, I could realize the universe was not against me. My father was a real jerk for beating up a toddler. So the
Yeah.
same way like you would watch a movie and you would say, hey, that abuser is doing a terrible thing to that child actor. It's a movie. And so that's I love the movie analogy. I always say like an old sitcom, like if you were in your own house and hearing somebody trying to break in, your emotions would go to a 10.
Right.
But when you're watching it on TV or a movie, your emotions are at a 2 because it can't really hurt you.
Right.
So I use that analogy all the time. I use TV, but I love how that person explained it because that's exactly how it felt.
Wow. Okay. So so you said that you were like when the whole thing was going on, you were like kind of like in a sleeping state, or because you said you don't remember it, or
Absolutely. So when you're in a therapeutic journey, specifically with MDMA, the way that the medicine, because in this instance the MDMA was a prescribed substance, there was a doctor in the room,
Mhm.
and so I always refer to it as the medicine. The way that the medicine worked was, for me, and I think you can tell I'm kind of a chatty person. So I would alternate talking with my therapist and my guide, a male and a female. And because if it was like for the first time in my life, I could actually talk about this stuff. Because trust me, people don't want to hear about suicide, drugs, and beatings in real life. So I could actually talk about it. But then I would kind of get the way that it's described is that let the medicine work, and that's when I would kind of lay down, and you see graphics all the time on the web of like a patient lying down on a sofa with a head mask and two people kind of by his or her side. And
Mhm.
that was very similar to my experience, that there were just some times where I would just get super, super quiet, put on the eye mask. I don't know why I said head mask, the eye mask. And that's when, and this is totally my opinion, it was almost like that's when the medicine kind of found the memories that eventually were going to be healed. I almost want to say like my brain was being marinated in that particular psychedelic for that period of time. And for me, um, it's not like you could say, oh, an hour and a half in, Jill's going to have her eye mask on. No, it was kind of just how the flow of it worked. And I was warned I wouldn't remember most of the journey. I mean, on average, I remember about 45 ish minutes of my 5 to 7 hour journeys. So I love that they were voice recorded so I could go back and listen to the transcript.
So you were still awake and talking, you just don't actually remember it. Okay.
Right, right.
Okay.
Right. And very coherent, no slurred words, not like I had too many margaritas. And for the first time, one of the things that's interesting is that, my whole life I told little white lies about my childhood and my family because I don't really have family anymore. My parents have passed, only child, and things I was, wasn't great even when they were alive. So I didn't really talk too much about it. And when I did, I covered things up. No white lies. If my therapist and guide asked me something that I didn't want to talk about or I didn't like, I just stayed quiet. Like I didn't lie to them. And I thought that was a major change in behavior for me, not covering up.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I think also is different for the most part in the veteran community, because when
Mm.
you get to that point with us, it we don't get quiet. It turns into anger, and that's
Oh,
where the yelling and the screaming starts, and we just get up and slam the door, and we probably will leave you with a nice little friendly statement and walk out, you know, and that's usually what happens a lot in those um, sessions, um, because we just get to that point where we don't want to talk about it no more. And
in a therapy session.
right, right.
Okay. Yeah. Not a MDMA session, a talk therapy session.
So I wonder if it would be the same thing, if the medication would relax somebody to where they would just, get quiet and not want to talk, but it could still go, because that would be a huge improvement, and I could keep resorting back to anger, and
Let's talk about that. Yeah.
I'll expand on that.
Yeah.
Um, the military, I call it our toolbox, right? The military gives you what you need to survive,
Okay.
all the way down to the equipment you need, the socks, your boots, your Kevlar, your flak vest, every piece of equipment you need, to include the emotion, right? You were trained to deal with everything with anger. You're having a hard time passing your PT test. Well, get mad, do more push-ups, you know, get mad, run.
Really?
Everything is anger, right? Because when you get
Oh,
over there and you're dealing with somebody that you're going to have violence with, where it's going to end up where somebody's going to probably be dead, you have to deal with it with anger, because any other emotion is going to cause you to rethink about what you're about to do.
sure.
So when you get out and you're now at work and your boss says, hey, you are going to work late today, I only have one emotion left to deal with it. And that's anger. But we're also very vocal, and most of us are very straightforward, so we don't just keep it to ourselves. We voice that anger, and that's where a lot of people feel that we're unstable or whatever, but it's the only thing we got in our toolbox.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the problems that most veterans have, is they don't know how to deal with anything else. They don't have that other emotion, you know. Um, the military, the Army did a lot of other things too. You know, they tried to change when they seen that they were working these soldiers. You know, they were there was too much deployments. We were in too many different places and stretched way too thin, and it was definitely tearing us apart. They started to covering their ass, and that's exactly what it was. Was they would put these grief counselors is really all they were. They were not psychiatrists. They were not real therapists. They were people that you could talk to, and advise the chain of command if there was a problem, right? But do you know where they always put their office? It was supposed to be no names mentioned, completely confidential, but their office was always next to the first sergeant's or the commander's office. So if you were seen going in there, your chain of
Everybody
command,
knew.
yeah. And I personally can tell you, as a leader in the military, I would hear it from the people above me. You know, so and so just went to the counselor. You know, so you know what's coming next. He's gonna be saying he's gonna commit suicide. Yada yada yada. He's gonna be trying to get out of this. You know, he's just trying to get out of shit. You know, and you were looked down on.
Shame.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you were shamed. Even if you attempted suicide, you were still shamed.
Wow.
Now even the person that was put there to watch you until they could get you in the hospital was shaming you because now you're taking time away from my family because I got to sit here and make sure you don't hang yourself with your tennis shoes. You know, and so all of that, that's the only emotion everybody has. That's it. It's anger. If you have anything else, then you didn't conform and you weren't trained, and you probably wasn't going to make it through the military, not at least as a career.
So it's interesting. I just got very curious. So forgive this question.
Okay.
For me, a lot of my outward behavior was, number one, all about shame, but number two, all about fear. Like there was an emotion beneath my behavior. Major type A, plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you know, not having the universe take everything the way my childhood was, da, da, da. Like all of my behavior was based on an underlying emotion of fear. My question is that you were the military is infusing this anger to allow people to survive. Is there an underlying emotion underneath that anger?
Oh, absolutely. So I can tell you where I was at when I got out.
Okay.
And this was going on for years. So I don't know if you've ever seen the movie. Have you ever seen the movie Lone Survivor?
No, but I'm not a big movie person, so don't hold that against me.
So I left Afghanistan 2 weeks prior to the incident that happened. There were some SEALs that got into trouble, and I'll keep the story short. Some people
I just lost my monitor. I'm going to try to get it back, but go ahead.
Some people in my unit were sent to try to rescue them, and they got shot down and was killed. All right.
Okay.
We lost a total of it was 10 people on that one aircraft that night.
Oh my God.
5 of them was from my unit. The other 5 were SEALs. And the aircraft was named Turbine 33. And up to that point, we've had no casualties from combat. I was under the impression that we were invincible. You didn't think about it. You know, it was a job. You got up, you went to work, and you went home. And whatever happened was part of the job. But that wasn't part of it.
No.
And, I had left 2 weeks before that happened. The commander that was killed on that craft, I was briefing 2 weeks prior to that. I was sitting on a Humvee talking to a young kid about the vehicle that him and his fiance was building. He was going to propose to his girlfriend when he got back home, and they were building a car together. And I worked in the motor pool, so that was the one thing that me and him had common. He was on aircraft and I worked in cars, and so he was talking to me about cars.
Mhm.
And and so fast forward, at that point now we have funerals that we have to go to, and there's families that we have to deal with this. And I remember
Right.
helping Marcus's wife. As a platoon, we went over and helped her pack because she was moving, back home, and her husband had been buried at Arlington, and she was going back home with her family. And I remember watching his kids.
Grief, grief,
Yeah,
grief, and lack of control, sadness. Those are very powerful emotions underneath all that anger.
but
Regret.
I just remember watching, thinking to myself, that could be me. That could be my wife.
Terror.
And then every deployment after that, it was always in the back of my mind,
How could it not be?
So you add the fear, and then you add the anger, and then you're mad at yourself for being scared,
Sure. Sure.
And then the career ends with the whole time you were afraid of dying and leaving your family, but now you're thinking about killing yourself because you're better off without your family. The whole thing just don't make no damn sense.
It doesn't. At the conscious level, it doesn't make sense. At the subconscious level, your inner, I say inner child, I'm going to take liberties and say your inner soldier. It may or may not be correct. I feel like it is, though. I feel like your inner soldier is saying, we need to do X, Y, Z to keep you safe. The same way my inner children said, we need to do X, Y, Z to keep you safe. And the X, Y, Zs are, in your case, it sounds like the anger. And in my case, it was absolutely the overproductivity and oversensitivity and anxiety. It's fascinating it's fascinating in a sad way, the layers of how our minds work when we're dealing with trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes deep, and it just, you think about all these people, and I ain't even talking about just military now. You look at police officers and
Yeah.
first responders that are seeing
Everywhere.
stuff every single day.
There's a statistic that on average 5% of the US population has or has had PTSD. I mean, there's a significant number of people in our country at any one time that are suffering. And you just talked about, there was something you just said about, oh gosh, I've been so caught up in the conversation. I forget what you said that made me think about can I mention, what one of the researchers, how one of the researchers describes what psychedelic does for us?
Oh, it's like playing it back as a like a movie. It's
Yeah, no, there's another, like, I think we were talking about the layers and just going back to kind of the underlying emotions. Dr. Carthart is one of the major researchers over in the UK, and he gave an analogy that psychedelic, so imagine a ski slope. This is what made me think of it. A ski slope that's got a lot of trails kind of dug into the snow from people skiing. He said what psychedelics do is they bring on a big giant snowstorm and they kind of cover up all those trails, and they allow for new ski trails to, I'm not a skier, can you tell? But they allow new ski trails to be made. There you go, for lack of a better way of saying it. And the trauma that I experienced, the fear, the not knowing, the psychedelics allowed me to kind of rewrite those experiences. And I think that's why this is so promising for veterans, because the way you're describing this to me is that you had certain ways of thinking imprinted in your subconscious to keep you safe.
Yeah.
And I feel like all the research around MDMA for veterans is showing that it is possible to throw more snow on those trails and boy, I need to become a skier, remake those trails.
Yeah. No, it absolutely does make sense, because
Ooh,
once it's kind of covered up at that point, the way I look at it then is,
you can like redo it.
yeah, you can start changing those paths and
Yeah.
realigning the brain to think different ways.
Yeah.
I
And
think,
to reshape those years. I mean, I don't know how it works. I only know my child abuse experience, but it's wow. Wow. I mean, the research has been focused around veterans, so
yeah.
thank goodness.
So let me ask you a question then, because the guy that came on last time, what he talked about mostly was with mushrooms.
Uh-huh.
He talked a little bit about at there towards the end was LSD, which was more the
Mhm.
synthetic. That he kind of anticipated that's what would probably be legalized first, because it's what the pharmaceutical guys would be able to make.
To make.
So,
Um,
he just assumes that at some point it's not going to become legalized until big pharma can copy it and sell it. But um,
interesting, yeah.
what is the difference between like MDA and
And
mushroom?
psilocybin, magic mushrooms, right. Okay, so just a quick little background. Maps.org has, so FDA has labeled MDMA for PTSD as breakthrough therapy, meaning that the FDA has been working with MAPS
Okay.
throughout all of the clinical trial work. And as long as MAPS can show the efficacy of the treatment with the data, the FDA is required to approve. Psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and by the way, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing psilocybin correctly. I hear it 5 other different ways. Johns Hopkins got the FDA. The FDA is working with Johns Hopkins University for psilocybin for depression.
Okay.
So that's where the FDA is working, at least what I've been informed about, going to the MAPS conference in June. So the different psychedelics can absolutely work to kind of jostle the brain differently. I'm only really familiar with MDMA and the release of serotonin. I've had therapeutic journeys with psilocybin and with MDMA. They definitely work differently.
Mhm.
Um, MDMA for trauma patients, if we're feeling in our bodies the trauma, if our shoulders are getting tight, if our stomach's getting upset, if we're not sleeping, if we're having lots of dreams, MDMA can calm our bodies down enough for us to start processing. Uh, Magic mushrooms, psilocybin, is a different experience. It's more of the traditional psychedelic neon visuals. For me, and again, I can only speak for me, I hear my inner voice big time with magic mushrooms. It's like my inner voice gives me lots of messages. For me, I'm not seeing images that really, really make an impact. For me, it's much more of the voice. Um, but you're not nearly as maybe coherent depending on the dosage that you take of magic mushrooms versus MDMA. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence and other clinical trials happening that depending on the dose of magic mushrooms that you take, there's something called a heroic dose, which is a very high dose. There's research going on about curing alcohol. I shouldn't say curing, I should say greatly reducing the alcoholism for folks who are experiencing that. I'm saying it badly, but I think you know what I'm getting at there. For me, my first 2 journeys, full MDMA, because my trauma was just, I needed to calm my body down. My third journey, and by the way, it was at the end of that third journey, the entire year, that's where I no longer qualified for the PTSD diagnosis. So it took me, I'm just like the clinical research, it took me 3 sessions. And that last session, the MDMA got me to like a certain point, and I had a trauma point of when I was 5 when my mother shot herself. And my guides, we had already talked about it, my therapist and my guide, they gave me a very small dose of magic mushrooms with the sole purpose of freeing me, freeing that inner 5-year-old that felt trapped in that childhood home. That's where I thought the universe was so awful, because internally I was trapped in my home. The psilocybin literally broke my house up in my mind. That was the image that I had. And I found myself in a beautiful little garden, and that was the end of the cycle of my PTSD. So very, very different experiences. I've never tried LSD. I can't speak to that.
Yeah.
But at least MDMA and magic mushrooms, very different experiences.
Yeah, he spoke about it. I don't think he really is fond of it. He just kind of brought it up as, as the other alternative that he kind of felt like, because my question was about legality. At what point did he think that it would become federally legal? And his response was that, LSD would probably be the first thing that came legal, and it would probably be because of big pharma. But
yeah, I mean, according to Rick Doblin, who runs MAPS, the FDA is set to approve MDMA in early 2024, which is one of the reasons why I'm talking about it now. And after, this is the way he described it, after the FDA approval, the DEA has to then reschedule MDMA. And I know it's a lot of abbreviations. And then the states have to decide how treatment happens. Like, this wouldn't be something where you and I would get a script and go to a pharmacy. This is something where we would go to a treatment center that would be allowed to do this. So I'm not familiar with any LSD federal. I'm not familiar with the roadmap for LSD, to be candid, just because my world is MDMA and magic mushroom.
I'll be honest, between me and you, I don't care which way it went. I hope that's the end path for all of it. I would prefer that it be supervised by somebody trained and by a doctor. I don't want any of this to be for recreational purposes. I really don't. We've got enough of that problem in this.
Not when healing trauma.
Right.
Trauma's tough, and I would not have been able to do this without my guide and my therapist, to be 1,000% candid. The psychotherapy portion is what makes this work. Yeah. So anybody out there who's saying, oh, I'm going to run to another country and I'm going to go do this, make sure you're working with people who will work with you.
Yeah. And, I brought this question up to him too, just in the world of fentanyl and you're not knowing what you're getting, know what you're getting and who you're getting it from.
1,000%. Yes. I had medical grade MDMA. I mean, it's a synthetic substance. Yes. I can we shout that from the rooftops?
Yes, please.
Yes. Yes.
In the community, we have enough deaths. We don't need somebody that's trying to heal themselves to accidentally do the wrong thing too.
And the thing is with MDMA, it's not you don't feel great after taking it because of the release of serotonin. You definitely have a hangover. It's not a kind of thing where you're like, oh, I want to take it every weekend. I mean, talk to the kids who were at raves. They'll tell you about it stops being fun real fast. So yeah, there's no reason to not be cautious when you're doing it, because you're going to be doing it once, twice, 3 times over, if you're doing it correctly, over a period of time, because you need the medication you need that physical therapy time. You need that integration time. That's when my brain actually restructured and reframed things. Like, that's when the healing really happened. So take your time, find out who you're working with, and soon enough, it's going to be available. It's available in Australia right now. It's going to be available here soon enough. So at least we can talk about it and have people understand the amount of work involved in the therapy.
Well, that's awesome. before we end, I do want to get into your book. So one of the parts of my nonprofit that I'm doing is to help veterans with their book. How was that for you writing that book? Was it difficult, or did you find it easy to sit down and get a book wrote and publish it yourself, or did you?
Well, so I started my career as an English teacher, so that might have been a little bit, I will admit. Uh, Here's the thing. I was incredibly privileged to have access to this therapy. I'm well aware that not everybody falls into a situation that I did.
Mhm.
And I felt a huge responsibility to make sure that people understood that psychedelics can be used to treat mental trauma. It would have been awful for me to have benefited from this and not taken a stand so that other people can have this opportunity, because you already see in the press some people like fighting back against psychedelics because we've all been fed this line of propaganda for so many years that it's a certain, the egg in the frying pan. And so I didn't find it difficult. I found it difficult talking. I wanted to talk about the therapy, and
Yeah.
my editor said to me repeatedly, you need to tell your story or else the healing's not going to make sense. So there's a lot in there about my childhood that people are like, oh, Jill. But if I didn't talk about it, then the healing wouldn't make sense.
Right.
Um, I wrote that. I self-published it because I didn't want a publishing house to tell me how to write it. I didn't want anything sugar-coated. I wanted it, and it's literally, I wrote it from my journals. So it's the year of healing as I experienced it without hindsight 2020. So you're kind of there, you're strapped in a seatbelt with me as I go through it.
Mhm.
And then I I got a job, and I went on a retreat. I went on a beautiful psychedelic retreat in Mexico later on because now I love just figuring out my brain. I love it. And I found that people did not know, they weren't prepared for the experience. So that's what made me write the workbook. The workbook is 8 strategies that my therapist and I used during my treatment. So I freely share with folks kind of what worked for me and to help them prepare. And then a couple of things happened in my life that I would have the opportunity to create the YouTube channel. I never thought I'd be a content creator. It just sounds funny to begin with, but I consider myself an educator because there's so many questions about this therapy, and I wanted to create the channel that I wish had been around when I was going through the therapy, so that I wasn't dependent upon, some marketing claim. And so I just feel incredibly privileged to have gotten this treatment, and it would have been a disservice if in the situation that I'm in, to not be explaining it and helping other people understand it for their own healing.
I think I like the way you put that as an educator. I agree with you. I used to call people until I did it. I used to say that people that were content creators were millennial panhandlers. That's what I used to call them. Until I did it, and then I realized, holy cow, they really are working, man. There is a lot of work that goes
It's
into
a
this.
lot of work. For good content, it's a
Yeah,
lot of work. You can put bad stuff out there, but I want to really make sure that if somebody is in a crisis and they're searching, that they will find solid, credible content from somebody who went through it. And so that's my goal.
yeah, absolutely. So, my hats off to you because I definitely I felt the same way until I did it, and I'm like you too. I do enjoy the research. I do enjoy the conversations, and
Hmm. Yeah.
you know, so I'm writing a book as well. But my purpose is for a little bit different reason. I'm
Uh-huh.
writing for my kids. I I want to explain to them. I mean, they're both older now. They're in college age, and
Uh-huh.
I want to explain to them why they had this kind of dad and ended with this other kind of dad. And I feel like I owe them at least the explanation, not the apology, because I can't take what happened back. It is what it is. but I want them to know the whole story of what happened. So the book isn't, I may or may not even put it on Amazon. I am going to go that same route if I do publish it, but I am writing it for them. So I will give it to them to read. And at that time, I'll decide whether I even put it up for anybody else to read, but that's what I'm writing it for. And, I didn't want to, we can have a conversation after they read it, but I wanted them to hear the whole story without an explanation. I wanted them to hear my thoughts, my words, and me to be able to sit there in front of the paper and tell the story of the things that I encountered, the things that I said, without having to explain and worry about, should I tell them this? Should I say this? Because I spent my whole career hiding the truth about, the things I seen and the bad stuff. And I try to protect them from that stuff. And all it really did is hide them from what's happening to me. And all they seen was the negative that was coming from me and not knowing why it was happening. So now they're going to get the why, and they're older, now too. So
What a gift. What a gift. Child abuse, people with abusive parents, they very rarely get that. Think of the insight that you will be giving to your kids. That's lovely. That is lovely. Kudos to you. Kudos to you for even thinking about it. There's a lot of people who wouldn't even go there. I wish you luck with it. Enjoy writing it. Try to enjoy writing it. I'm sure it's going to be tough.
Yeah, the first half of it was pretty easy, but now we're getting into the deployments, and I've had to take breaks because it's getting tougher. But I'll eventually get through it.
It's one of the advantages of self-publishing. If you choose to do that, you're on your own timeline.
Yep, I agree.
Oh my gosh,
I agree.
When you get it done, I look forward to it. Throw me a link.
Absolutely, I absolutely I will. If I do publish it up there, I will send it to you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Are there any last minute questions? Is there anything that I didn't answer that you think people will be like, oh, Jill should have talked about XYZ?
If somebody wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Oh, super easy. On the page right there, the Journey Sage, just head over to thejourneysage.com and they can actually schedule time with me on my calendar, or on YouTube, The Journey Sage. That's where all the educational content is if they want to search. You can also find me. I just started on TikTok, so give me a little time. It's that whole content creation stuff. But I'm pretty easy to find, and still really working to make sure that I get the information and resources out to people that they want.
Absolutely. Well, when I post this up on Spotify, so it should go up next week. I'll send you the actual date. It should be, it'll either be a Tuesday or Wednesday. Those are the 2 days that I post them up. It will also have all your links in there, your YouTube channel, and a link to
website
on books, and a link to your website. So
absolutely, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been such a privilege, and it was just the vulnerability that with the content that you've shared here too. Just thank you.
I appreciate the knowledge, because like I said, this is something I'm seriously looking at down the road of doing. So, this podcast is about knowledge for me to learn. So that's the type of stuff that I bring on. I'm curious about. So let's talk about it.
Awesome. Well, you know where I am with additional questions.
So absolutely. Will you take care, Joel? If you don't mind, hang on just for a second. Let me throw the exit video, and we'll head out. All right. Y'all take care, man. We'll see y'all. I believe the next show is Wednesday. We'll see y'all. Take care. Be safe.